much. There we go. I have no idea what he just said before, but it sounded really smart. I also think he may be my long-lost brother separated at birth, but I'm not sure. I'm very excited to be here. I've never been to Brazil before, and it feels like music to me. I love it. The stuff I'm going to cover is hard to understand if you speak English. So I'm going to try to make it, it's just very high-level stuff, but it's very exciting stuff. So I'll do my best to make it relatable. I've been trying to do that now for about 20 years. I'm getting better and better. But here's the deal. There's two ideas that I love. The first is sustainability, the concept of sustainability. The other is change. Those are two ideas that mean a lot to me. They seem to be in my blood, so to speak. And what's exciting about today is that I get to talk about them both at the same time. Now, when you put those two ideas together, you get a really crazy idea, which is a paradox, right? Sustainable change. It's like permanent impermanence. It sounds crazy, but here's the deal. There is now overwhelming evidence that paradox is actually at the root of how nature creates, and also, as we'll get into, it's also how people who can drive change think, right? So when we align with who we really are, our true nature, we actually think paradoxically, and we create results that others are scratching their heads wondering how we did it. And that's the real message today that I'd like to get across. And I'm going to go through some technical stuff because I'm just very excited that I believe we have, it's not just philosophy, there's practical stuff. In fact, there's a skill that I call strategic framing. And this is the skill that is going to help you create whatever you want much more quickly than you might have believed possible. But Einstein said that a problem cannot be solved from the same level of thinking that created it, right? So we need to shift our thinking in order to learn this skill. That's what I'm going to try to help you at least see is possible today. I can't really teach it in 20 minutes, but I'm going to try to at least help you believe that that's possible because I personally just know that you have tremendous ability to create once you shift how you look at your problems. So let's get into it. The first thing that we want to look at is the word change. It's a word we hear all the time. If I asked you, change is what? What is it? Like, what is it that we all agree on about change? If you polled 1,000 people, does anybody have an idea what the most common adjective would be for change? And I won't know what you're saying probably anyway. I'll bet you, because I've done this, I'll bet you it would be your word for hard or difficult. Change is hard, right? Ugh, change is hard. Why is it that everybody, makes New Year's resolutions to lose weight, eat well, not smoke, and they're good for a while, then 3 weeks later they're right back where they were? Because change is hard. Why is it that everybody talks about sustainability and nobody wants the world to go to pot? But when push comes to shove, it's not always a priority, right? Because change is hard. Why is it that at the end of the day, we're in a situation where the global climate is shifting, ice caps are melting, we know exactly what to do about it, but we're not doing it. Why? Because change is hard. So I think the fact is it's a lot easier to talk than it is sometimes to do because we feel that change is hard. We agree with that? Okay. Now, how about this, in the spirit of paradox? What if change isn't hard at all? What if it's absolutely simple? Could it be that change is really, really simple? Is that possible? They just said it was hard, right? Well, if it is possible, how would we make that happen, right? I can't prove that change is simple, but what we could do is look for evidence of that. Is there anyone who's ever made change look simple? Well, there's this guy who wasn't a sustainability advocate, but he was really good at change. He just made it look simple, and everybody's wondering, how do you do it? I'm going to tell you how you did it, and you can do it too. But first, not everybody has to be a big hotshot. There's a friend of mine. Her name is Lynn Doe. She lives in Australia. When she was a teenager in high school, she successfully, without any money or training, got the entire country of Australia to ban incandescent light bulbs, right? She made it look simple. A billion-dollar lobbyist couldn't have done it, and she did it, right? It's a real person. She's neat. There's also clients, you know. I mean, we do a lot of work with companies big and small, and there's one client I'm proud of what they've done. They are an online virtual world for kids around sustainability. And when I met them a few years ago, they were having a hard time they're running out of money. Only 30,000 kids had signed up. The investors didn't want to give them any more money. It was kind of a tough situation. But then we had a one-day session. We collected some data. We kind of looked at how they were seeing things and where they were out of alignment. We removed their barriers to change. They saw very clearly what they wanted to do, and within a matter of months, they had risen from 30,000 to 1 million users on their platform, and they'd raised $5 million, like that. They had tried for a long time. It was hard. They removed the barrier. It happened quickly, right? So the big idea here is that change is simple. The question is, why doesn't it feel simple, right? I'll tell you why. There's a bad guy, a villain, called frame lock. I call it frame lock, right? If there's a villain, I want it to be frame lock. Frame lock is a phrase I invented to represent a very real phenomenon that you might have experienced, where a person gets locked into a certain way of looking at the world, a frame of reference. And they get so used to looking at it a certain way that they're totally closed to new ideas, and they don't even know that they're closed to the new ideas, right? Has anyone ever experienced someone who was like that? A couple of you? Okay. No, not you, though. The thing is, frame lock is the bad guy, and frame lock is the bad guy who sneaks into your own head and convinces you that it's them, right? Frame lock is just as common in advocates as it is in the people they try to persuade, and it's the main reason advocates aren't successful, because they get frame locked into them. We got to change them, right? Frame lock is brilliantly clever bad person, okay? And it results, frame lock is universal. It results in everything that we don't like, right? So if that's the real source to drive change, is to overcome frame lock, right? Then the hero, well, who's the hero then? We need a hero, because you can't just have a bad guy. You're the hero, but your training to really achieve your superhero status is what I call frame mastery. There's a skill set that you can learn that will allow you to unlock frames, and it works. It's how I created my career from nothing, and it's how you can do what you want, and it's how I help clients achieve what they want. What it does is pulls people out of that condition, and ultimately it helps you find and share your unique voice, whatever that is. Now, it's one thing to talk in the abstract. It's another thing to say, here's how you do it. I'm going to go through that in a minute, but just know that I'm not making this stuff up. In fact, it's all science. I don't know if you like science, hate science, but I'm a behavioral scientist, and I've been spending my whole career figuring this out. And we have a system called Worldview Thinking, which is the world's first scientifically grounded, actionable system for helping us pull people out of the constraining frames that keep them from seeing our vision. Does that make sense? So there's all kinds of stuff. And by the way, later, if you want to get into some of the data and the more geeky stuff, we're doing a seminar, we're doing one on communication later where I'll be able to open up on that. But for now, let me go through what I call the 5 lessons of frame mastery. I'm going to go a little quick. Don't worry about getting all of it. Just, I want you to see the 50,000-foot perspective, okay? But first, I'm going to drink some water. All right. So the first step is really about getting out of your own frames. Now, how do you do that, right? So I could be like, get out of your frame. I'm in a frame, right? Frames are paradoxical. So what you got to do, practically speaking, is start to really understand how brilliant your own subconscious mind is and become friends with it. All right? I don't know what you know about brain science. You guys aren't getting enough love over here. Let me walk this way. But your subconscious mind is where your frames are created, right? What you're seeing is all organized in the subconscious, which processes 40,000 bits of information every second. Think about that. I mean, 20 million bits of information every second, where your conscious mind's only 40, right? So a 500,000% difference. So your subconscious is doing all the work, right? And if you don't respect it, then you stay trapped by it, right? So very important. And this is simple, but people don't do this in business. I could tell you some stories, but it's just not a habit people have, okay? But it's real important. Now, here's what I'm really excited about. Turns out, one of the discoveries we made is that the unconscious mind is actually two minds. Did you know that? I didn't either, or maybe you did. You have what we call a primal unconscious, which deals with your will, right? That's the frame holder, right? It's the primal survival part of you, right? It's important to have that, right? And that's the one that creates frames and holds on to them. And it's also your will, right? You also, though, have what we call a creative unconscious. Your creative, have you ever had a big idea or insight just hit you? If you've ever felt inspired, if you ever, that's your creative unconscious. It's a completely opposite to your primal, right? And all the great inventions and discoveries and inspirations come ultimately from the creative unconscious, right? Now your frames, the way that you're listening to me and making sense of me or not, it's all created through that unconscious, which is in attention, right? But it's sandwiched. Your conscious mind is sandwiched between your creative unconscious and your primal. So the key to driving change and to becoming unframe locked is always to try to access the creative unconscious of your audience. And to do that, you have to access it in yourself, right? That's the big picture here. It's actually fun, by the way. Everything I'm saying is fun. It's a lot more fun in practice than talking about it. Because it's about being creative, right? And it's about having a good time sometimes rather than being serious. But given that, I want you to memorize a phrase that might sound like gibberish, but it's not. Lesson 2 is, this is the one that will help you get unframe locked anytime you feel so. Life is a paradox, wrapped in a dilemma, disguised as a series of endless, unsatisfying either-or choices. Right? You got that? Life is a paradox, wrapped in a dilemma, disguised as a series of choices. This is actually a direct translation of the Worldview Thinking algorithms into language. This is I can talk to you about it later, but just know the big idea here is that we each feel like we have to make choices, and we don't like to make those choices a lot of times, The trick to getting unframe locked is to first see the choice that you don't like and call it false, right? To do that, you need to look down and say, what's the dilemma that seems to give rise to this choice, which seems very real to me? And if you have that free will to choose to not buy into the false choice or the dilemma because you just know in your heart that that's not real, even though it seems real, you get a really awesome payoff. You get to start over from zero right now. Does that make sense? And, the thing is, it doesn't make sense. This is paradoxical. But just stick with it and let it sink in, because if you do this, just this one thing will take you where you want to be. If you can just not buy in to the false either or, if you can just give yourself the authorship not to buy into what everyone else is believing is real, that's immediately when you start to create rather than react. Very powerful stuff. Now, I'm probably at 20 minutes already. I have a tendency to do that. But I want to make sure we get through, so let me go to the next. No, I'm only at 13 minutes. What was I saying? Hey, we've got all the time in the world. Okay. Third lesson. Okay, now, you're out of your frame, right? Now, you want to start communicating with others and getting them out of their frames, right? This is how change happens, right? The third thing you want to get good at is what I call framing for both and. putting your message, your products across to people in a way where they feel that both and are possible, right? This ad, every great ad in history and speech has done this. Everyone. But one I picked here is the VW ad. It's the most successful ad campaign in history. It's always ranked as the best by all the advertisers. And it's wonderful for a lot of reasons, but it's a great example of both and framing. Most communicators do either or framing, right? Either you like me or you can go wherever, you know, you go to hell, right? I mean, that's implied by almost every message out there, right? It's an attempt to manipulate, which is fine. I'm not judging it, but it doesn't drive change. It reinforces cynical frames. Does that make sense? So this is all about choice. It's all about free will. Once you understand both and framing, you have the power to actually help people remember their own power and their own choice. That's what this ad did. It basically, in a car market that said, if you don't buy our car, you'll be unhappy, but if you do, you'll be happy, right? What this said is, be yourself, be happy. Oh, we got this cool car too, right? Be yourself. It was standing for something, right? And people felt that. They didn't need much text. It's all in the space there, right? People just feel it. This is not intellectual. It's in our guts, right? It's in our heart. You can do this. Now, you know, the trick, though, it does take some learning. There's actually 4 elements. We're not going to go through every one of these. I know you're glad, right? This is more workshop material. But do know that there's actually a systematic process you can work through to do this. You just need to know what you stand for, your theme, you know, what it is that you really care about. You need to have a vision of what you want to create with clarity. You need to create a structure that's going to work for your audience and resonate with them. And then you need to make sure it's aligned. And when you get all those together, everything changes. So it all breaks down pretty simple, right? That doesn't mean it's easy, but it's simple. One more here. Now, okay, so we're starting to get good now. Well, we want to resonate with people because they might not get us. So we now need to know our audience. Traditional approaches to knowing people, segmentations and such, can be very good. But they don't go deep enough to help us pull this off. And so what we have here, this is our segmentation, if you want to call it that, based on worldviews. Worldviews are the basic meta frames that your audience uses, right? So when you're talking to somebody, you can rest assured they're filtering you through these worldviews. Now, the reason worldviews work so much more effectively than anything I've ever seen, like and then some, is because they are based on science and they're based on the truth, which is that the dilemma. People see the world as a dilemma. Listen, it's real simple. There's 2 dilemmas, basically, in life. There's only 2. Everyone anywhere has ever had an experience that they didn't like was trying to resolve a dilemma of one of 2. The first is, ready? Me getting what I want and being special versus me connecting and giving myself over to something larger, right? Self-world. Very simple. But we code it as an either-or, right? So people feel that they have to choose between, you know, getting what they want and being taken advantage of. All kinds of stuff happens when we code that in our brain as an either-or. So that's one. The other one's time, right? Past, future. We have a choice in every moment whether to frame it as an opportunity to preserve what I already have and stay in my comfort zone, right? And be afraid of the future, or to go create the future and have no respect for the past. We tend to be on polarities on those. So self, world, past, future. It's just time and space, that's all. This is, by the way, mostly physics. I spent years studying physics, and everybody thought I was crazy, but I just knew there was a connection between psychology and physics, and there is. It's time and space. Now, here's what's crazy and awesome, right, for you. All you need to do, you don't even need to think about this stuff. I just like to talk about it because I spent so much time working on it. But you do kind of got to get the idea, because if you know just these 4 thinking types that we have here, you could be radically effective once you understand, because you'll understand why they're not getting you, right? We'd like to raise some money, please. We'd like you to buy our product. Wait, they just don't lie. They don't get us. What can we do? Well, we can understand them, right? I guarantee you, everybody wants to do good. People aren't bad, unless we're frame locked towards them. Then they look bad, and then they act bad because they know that we don't like them. You know what I'm saying? There's 4 types. If you know these, you're going to start to see the wizard behind the curtain in terms of the Wizard of Oz, if you ever saw that, right? You'll understand that people want to play along, but they're afraid. They're locked into a frame based on some limiting assumptions. That's it. So I hope you get that, because, I've written a book on that. You can read that. I want you to get really good at this, and then I want you to be very successful, and then I want to take credit. Good. That was a good moment to laugh. All right. Just know that there's a very clear dilemma structure under each thinking style. Very clear. These are the limits of the frame. So, for example, the believer, who gives a lot of sustainability advocates a hard time. Right? The believer a lot of times does not believe in climate change because they believe that it doesn't fit with their faith. They're looking at life as a test that you either pass or fail, and they don't want to fail, right? So their frame, a lot of times they really hold on to their frames. You can't get someone to change their frames. You can't, nor should you. You can invite them to realize that they don't have to hold on to their frames. Does that make sense? You can give them space. You give them an opportunity to change, right? Well, with the believer, the way to do that is very much baked into the structure of the frame. Look at this, right? So the believer is choosing the past and security and meaning, sacrifice, over the other quadrants. We all, by the way, are doing that in one way or another, and we're all trapped, but in different ways. So what's happening is, because their frame is composed of those values, everything else gets judged, right? But we judge things because they want it. Your unconscious wants it, right? And you think you can't have it, right? So you judge it because you don't want to see the thing that you don't have. Does that make sense? We can't beat our subconscious ever. We can't beat our subconscious. It's the whole thing, right? So what do I do to a believer if I would like to have them buy my sustainable product? And by the way, I've used this to help organic food producers create a 30% rise in their retail sales from a simple packaging redesign. You know how powerful this stuff is? I could tell you a story. You talk about results, right? This is the most practical thing you've ever heard, and it probably feels like the most impractical, or maybe not. But I talk to business audiences, and their version of practicality is extremely impractical, right? Because you create the change now when you understand it, right? And the believer mindset, the way to change a believer is never to try to argue with them, right? You'll just reinforce their frames. The trick is to create space and give them an opportunity to create so that they can satisfy their own need for self-expression that they haven't been necessarily expressing as much, and their need to drive change, which we all have. So that's the deal. But it's true. I could do this for every one of these. Every single worldview has its own unique dilemma structure and its own unique both-and proposition that would be compelling. That's just what I want you to get, because I really want you to go out and give them a hard time when we leave here. There's lots of stories I could go through. This is already happening. So this frame lock is already being unlocked by the sheer force of survival necessity and by the brilliant learning that happens in the human mind when we commit to something. So we're finding that a lot of believers who didn't believe in sustainability are now advocating for it, but they're doing it for reasons that often are different than the way the originators of the movement did it, which is fine, and it's great, right? They're seeing that it's an opportunity for tradition and change at the same time, right? In the business community, we wouldn't be sitting here if the achievers, who are the sort of success-oriented capitalist mindset, right, the big brands, we wouldn't be here if they weren't already starting to unlock in a big way, and sustainable brands is a part of that. These are just a few examples of brands I've worked with that I have felt very inspired by the level of thinking that's going on with them, but there's many, many more. And also, this is a big one. I haven't always been popular because a lot of my audience is dreamers. Dreamers are like the we can do it it's a wonderful worldview. It's all about connection and empathy and community. But the thing about the dreamers get locked into a self-righteousness, which is to say, capitalism is bad and business is greedy and they can get very upset. So, the truth is that's frame lock and it's bad, right? I mean, that's not a really good way to share a message, even if you're right? So, but that's fine. I mean, dreamers are great. We're all just working it out. But dreamers are now finally starting to unlock too. And you're seeing NGOs partnering with corporations, and we're seeing a both and where you can be of service and also make money at the same time. So it's all unlocking, and what's cool and different, and I believe an opportunity, I hope, for you, or else I wasted my time doing all this research, but is that we actually understand how this works. You understand? I mean, we know exactly how this works. This is the laws of nature. They're completely impersonal, right? Like the laws of physics. It doesn't matter who uses them. I mean, if I wanted to create a rocket, right, at the end of the day, the rocket's either going to fall or succeed based on whether I follow the laws of physics, right? Because it couldn't care whether I had a degree from or went to NASA. You know what I mean? Nature is totally impersonal, which is a little bit hard because we think we're special. But still, what's cool is that when you have impersonal laws like this, you can create whatever you want when you understand how it works. That's all. That's the big idea. Now, the final point is the one I like the most. Final lesson, which is just to, once you get this stuff, as it sinks in and as you let it in over time, share your voice. You've heard the phrase, so-and-so found their voice. They found their voice. Is this concept, yeah. Well, did you know that's actually a scientific fact? You actually have a voice. I know I can't get into all of it here, but basically, that creative unconscious that we talked about, when that's functioning effectively, you start to leverage a principle that we call the principle of authority or authorship, where you create reality rather than reacting to it, self-authorship, right? With that principle, naturally, you become a visionary. You start to see a vision of what would be possible to create, right? And at a brand level, when people are thinking that way, it leads to breakthrough innovation, right? People all self-authoring and creating vision. That's one big element of your voice. Now, what happens then is this, and this is the way nature creates, by the way. This is the logic. Once we have that vision, we have to try to get it across to people, and we have to be practical. And so then we bring our conscious mind to reframe what we're doing, right? We start to try to resonate with people. Once we understand how to frame for resonance, when we have a vision worth talking about, we start to get strategic clarity. And on a big level, we know exactly the right moves to make, right, in order to create what we want. Now, here's the fun part. It's all about you, so listen up. Once you have a vision and a strategy in place, right, then is when you bring your primal unconscious, that powerful little will of yours, to support and maintain the frames, right, that are going to change the world. This is, right, that builds trust. And that's the only way you'll get trust. Trust is hard because you don't get trust, you give it, right? The way you get trust is by giving it. It's a paradox, right? Now, how are you going to trust if you don't have a soul-issued vision with a strategy that you believe? It's very hard to be generous because, right? But here's the good news. When you have all three of these, right, you bring trust in, that leads to the passion that you need to continue, right? And then that passion over time is what leads to true leadership. Not leadership based on convention, but leadership based on your voice, right? So I know I went through a lot. I hope it made sense. But even if it, whatever you walk away with, I really want you to get one big idea. Well, two. First is that change can and should be simple. The other is that you have a voice. You have a voice. And if it's bigger and more powerful than you can possibly imagine. And with that voice, you can create whatever you want. And I know that as a fact. So I hope you believe it because your brand has a voice. Brazil has a voice. Sustainable Brands has a voice. And I truly believe that unless we're just talking up here, if we really want to drive change, it's time to start tapping into that. And I am very excited to see what becomes in the world once more of us start doing that. So thank you very much.